Good afternoon and welcome to NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. We are live today with NASA experts.
Scientists are absolutely terrified by what China just switched on, because what is burning inside this machine in Hefei right now should not exist. A star. A real, actual star. Running 6 times hotter than the core of our sun, contained inside a building, and nobody in the West is talking about it. While you were sleeping, China just solved the energy problem that has stumped the greatest scientific minds on Earth for 70 years. And the consequences of what they have built are so enormous that governments are scrambling behind closed doors. This changes absolutely everything, and it starts right now.
Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody of where we are, who is where in this play. As you saw in the animations while Nikki was speaking, the sun, of course, is at the center of our solar system. The planets are orbiting around the sun.
In January 2025, scientists at a research facility in Hefei, China, set a world record that most people outside the scientific community have barely heard of. The machine responsible is called EAST, which stands for Experimental Advanced Superconducting Tokamak. On the 20th of January, it ran a continuous plasma operation for 1,066 seconds at a temperature exceeding 100 million degrees Celsius. That works out to just under 18 minutes of sustained, controlled plasma at a temperature that has no natural equivalent anywhere on Earth. To put that in perspective, the surface of the Sun sits at roughly 5,500 degrees Celsius. The core of the Sun, where nuclear fusion actually occurs naturally, reaches around 15 million degrees Celsius. The plasma inside EAST during that January run was operating at more than 6 times that temperature. And unlike the Sun, which has been burning through its own gravitational pressure for around 4.5 billion years, this was happening inside a purpose-built machine, in a controlled laboratory environment, in a city in eastern China. The record itself is significant, not just because of the temperature, but because of the duration. Plasma at these temperatures is extraordinarily difficult to sustain. It is not a stable state. Left to itself, it collapses almost instantly. The entire challenge of fusion research has always been keeping that plasma burning long enough and stably enough to be of any practical use. For most of the history of fusion science, sustaining high-temperature plasma for even a few seconds was considered a meaningful achievement. The fact that EAST held it for over 1,000 seconds without a disruption represents a shift in what researchers now consider possible. The previous world record for sustained high-temperature plasma was 403 seconds. That record was also held by EAST, set in 2023. So in the space of roughly 2 years, the same team at the same facility nearly tripled their own record in a single experimental run. Scientific progress in fusion has historically been measured in small, incremental steps. What happened between 2023 and 2025 was not incremental. EAST is operated by the Institute of Plasma Physics, which is part of the Hefei Institutes of Physical Science, run under the Chinese Academy of Sciences. The machine has been in operation since 2006, and over those 2 decades it has been upgraded repeatedly. The run that produced the January 2025 record followed a significant upgrade to the reactor's plasma heating systems. The heating power involved in keeping a plasma ball stable at 100 million degrees is considerable, requiring systems working in coordination to maintain conditions that are, by any ordinary measure, extreme. The machine itself is a tokamak, which is a specific type of fusion device designed around a donut-shaped chamber. The fundamental principle is that plasma at these temperatures cannot physically touch any material surface. Any known metal, ceramic, or composite would be instantly vaporized. The solution, developed over decades of plasma physics research, is to use powerful magnetic fields to hold the plasma suspended in the center of the chamber, away from the walls entirely. The superconducting magnetic coils in EAST generate fields strong enough to do exactly that. Those coils, by contrast, operate near absolute zero, the coldest temperature, achievable under the laws of physics. Inside the same machine, at the same moment, you have plasma running at temperatures 6 times hotter than the core of the Sun, and magnetic coils running at temperatures close to minus 273 degrees Celsius. The gap between those 2 extremes within a single piece of engineering is larger than the gap between the Sun's core and the vacuum of outer space. Keeping that system stable for fractions of a second is an engineering challenge. Keeping it stable for nearly 18 continuous minutes is something different entirely. The January 2025 run was also noted as being disruption-free throughout its entire duration. In fusion research, a disruption is when plasma confinement breaks down suddenly, releasing energy in an uncontrolled way and ending the run. A disruption-free run of that length, at that temperature, is considered as important a result as the duration record itself. Stability at the conditions required for commercial fusion power is the central technical problem the field is trying to solve, and East demonstrated it at a scale that had not been achieved before. The record did not arrive in isolation. Earlier in 2026, researchers at East announced that the reactor had breached a significant plasma density barrier, sustaining stable plasma at densities that had previously been associated with confinement collapse. Plasma density is one of the key variables in fusion physics. A reactor needs plasma that is not only hot enough and sustained long enough, but also dense enough for the fusion reactions to occur at a meaningful rate. Hitting all three of those conditions simultaneously, at the scales required for a power-generating device, is what the field has been working toward for decades. The density announcement in 2026 suggested that at least one of the assumed limits on what tokamaks could achieve was not as fixed as the physics community had believed. That claim, if it holds up under further experimental review, carries real weight. Physics has a long list of benchmarks and theoretical ceilings that experiments have eventually shown to be more flexible than expected. Whether the East density result represents a genuine revision to plasma physics theory or a more limited finding specific to the reactor's configuration is something that the wider scientific community will continue to examine. But the announcement was treated seriously by fusion researchers globally. What makes the East achievement worth paying attention to beyond the headline numbers is the trajectory it reflects. In 2021, East crossed the 100-second mark for the first time. In 2023, it reached 403 seconds. In 2025, it passed 1,000 seconds. Each of those milestones was a significant jump rather than a marginal improvement on the last. The team responsible has shown a consistent ability to identify what was limiting their previous results and address it in the next experimental phase. That kind of systematic progress, backed by continued investment and a stable research base, is what separates a one-off result from a genuine development curve. The 1,066-second run is a data point, but it is also evidence of a research program that has been building toward this kind of result for nearly 20 years. The scientists who conducted it have been working with this machine long enough to understand its behavior in considerable detail. The upgrades that preceded the January 2025 run were not rushed or improvised. They were the product of careful analysis of what the previous record runs revealed about where the system's limits lay. For a field that has spent the better part of 7 decades being described as perpetually 30 years away from delivering practical results, the pace of progress at East over the past 4 years represents something that researchers and policymakers alike are beginning to take seriously. To understand why the East record matters beyond the headline numbers, it helps to step back and look at where the world currently gets its energy and why fusion has been treated as such a significant goal for so long. Almost every major economy on Earth generates the bulk of its electricity through some variation of the same basic process. You burn a fuel source, use the heat to boil water, turn that steam into mechanical energy through a turbine, and convert that mechanical energy into electricity. Coal plants work this way. Gas plants work this way. Even some facilities that are marketed as modern or clean still rely on combustion as their primary energy source. The process is not complicated, but it comes with costs that have been accumulating for a long time. Burning fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, produces particulate pollution, and depends on fuel reserves that are finite and unevenly distributed around the world. Conventional nuclear power takes a different approach. It does not burn anything. Instead, it uses a process called fission, which involves splitting heavy atoms, typically uranium, and capturing the energy that is released when those atoms break apart. Fission has been generating electricity commercially since the 1950s and currently provides a meaningful share of the world's low-carbon electricity. But it comes with its own set of problems. The process produces radioactive waste that remains hazardous for tens of thousands of years and requires secure, long-term storage solutions that no country has fully resolved. The history of fission power also includes accidents at Chernobyl in 1986 and Fukushima in 2011, both of which had lasting consequences for public confidence in nuclear energy and for the regulatory environment around it. Fusion is a fundamentally different process, and the differences are not minor. Where fission splits heavy atoms apart, fusion pushes light atoms together. The fuel most commonly used in fusion research consists of two isotopes of hydrogen called deuterium and tritium. Deuterium is found in ordinary seawater in significant quantities. Every liter of seawater contains a small amount of deuterium, and the oceans cover roughly 71% of the Earth's surface, meaning the total available supply is effectively inexhaustible on any timescale that matters to human civilization. Tritium is rarer and is typically produced within the fusion reactor itself by using lithium, which is a relatively common element, as part of the reactor's internal structure. When deuterium and tritium are heated to the temperatures required for fusion, something specific happens to the matter involved. The heat strips the electrons away from the atomic nuclei, producing a state of matter that behaves differently from a solid, a liquid, or a gas. This state is called plasma, and it is the fourth state of matter. At the temperatures required for fusion, plasma does not behave in ways that match ordinary physical intuition. It is electrically charged, highly reactive to magnetic fields, and unstable in ways that make it difficult to control. The energy released by fusion is a consequence of a basic principle in nuclear physics. When two hydrogen nuclei are forced together under the right conditions, they fuse into a single helium nucleus and release a neutron. The combined mass of the helium nucleus and the neutron is very slightly less than the combined mass of the two hydrogen nuclei that went into the reaction. That small difference in mass is converted directly into energy in accordance with Einstein's mass-energy equivalence. The amount of energy produced relative to the mass of fuel consumed is extraordinarily high. 1 kilogram of fusion fuel produces roughly the same energy as 10 million kilograms of coal. The ratio is so large that it is genuinely difficult to grasp in practical terms. The reaction produces no carbon dioxide. It generates no long-lived radioactive waste. The helium produced as a byproduct is an inert, harmless gas, and critically, fusion cannot produce the kind of runaway chain reaction that made Chernobyl and Fukushima possible. If the plasma confinement breaks down for any reason, the fusion reaction simply stops. The plasma cools and disperses almost instantaneously. There is no scenario in which a fusion reactor continues to generate energy after confinement has been lost, because the conditions required for the reaction are so extreme and so difficult to maintain that the slightest disruption ends it. Given all of that, the obvious question is why fusion has not already replaced every other energy source on the planet. The answer comes down to the physics of what is required to make the reaction happen in the first place. To force hydrogen nuclei to fuse, you have to overcome the electromagnetic repulsion between them. Atomic nuclei carry a positive charge and, like charges, repel each other. The only way to get nuclei close enough together for the strong nuclear force to take over and cause fusion is to give them enough kinetic energy to overcome that repulsion. Kinetic energy at the atomic scale is temperature. To reach the conditions necessary for fusion, the plasma has to be heated to temperatures in the range of 100 million degrees Celsius or above. That is the threshold at which the nuclei are moving fast enough and colliding with enough energy for fusion reactions to occur at a useful rate. The problem is that no material on Earth can withstand direct contact with plasma at those temperatures. Any physical container would be vaporized instantly. You cannot simply build a box and fill it with fusion plasma the way you might contain a conventional reaction. This is the engineering problem that has defined fusion research for the past 70 years, and it is the reason that building a working fusion reactor is so much harder than the basic physics might suggest. The solution that has proven most effective is the Tokamak design. A tokamak uses powerful magnetic fields to hold the plasma suspended within a donut-shaped chamber, keeping it away from the physical walls entirely. The plasma follows the magnetic field lines and is held in a stable configuration as long as the fields remain strong and well controlled. In theory, this approach solves the containment problem. In practice, plasma at fusion-relevant temperatures is subject to a range of instabilities that can disrupt the magnetic confinement suddenly and without much warning. Managing those instabilities, predicting where they will develop, and designing systems capable of suppressing them before they grow large enough to cause a disruption has been one of the central research challenges of the field. East is a superconducting tokamak, meaning that its magnetic coils are made from materials that conduct electricity with zero resistance when cooled to near absolute zero. Superconducting magnets can generate much stronger and more stable magnetic fields than conventional copper coils, and they do so without generating the waste, heat that would otherwise make continuous operation impractical. The engineering required to maintain superconducting coils at temperatures close to -273 degrees Celsius while simultaneously running plasma at 100 million degrees just meters away involves systems that push the boundaries of what current materials, science, and cryogenic engineering can reliably deliver. The temperature differential between the plasma at the center of the machine and the magnetic coils surrounding it is greater than the temperature differential between the surface of the Sun and the vacuum of deep space. Both of those extremes are present simultaneously inside the same machine. The plasma wants to expand, cool, and collapse. The magnetic fields have to continuously respond and adjust to prevent that from happening. Every second that a high-temperature plasma burn continues represents a continuous, real-time battle between the natural tendency of the plasma to become unstable and the engineered systems designed to hold it in check. For most of the history of fusion research, the longest sustained plasma runs were measured in single-digit seconds. Getting past that barrier required advances in plasma heating, magnetic field control, real-time diagnostics, and the computational systems used to model and predict plasma behavior. The progress made over the past 2 decades, and particularly over the past 5 years, reflects genuine advances in all of those areas working together, rather than a breakthrough in any single component. The 1066-second run in January 2025, combined with the plasma density result announced in 2026, represents the clearest demonstration yet that the engineering challenges involved in sustained fusion plasma are solvable. They have not been fully solved. The gap between what East achieved and what a commercial power plant would require is still substantial. But the direction of travel and the rate at which progress is now being made has shifted how researchers across the field are thinking about the timeline. The progress made at East does not exist in isolation. It is part of a broader program that China has been building and funding with considerable consistency over the past 2 decades, and the results coming out of Hefei are increasingly difficult to separate from the strategic context in which they are being produced. China's fusion research roadmap is structured around a sequence of machines, each designed to build on the lessons of the last. East, which has been operating since 2006, functions as the experimental foundation. The data it has generated across nearly 20 years of operation, including the plasma behavior observed during the record runs, feeds directly into the design of the next machine in the sequence. That machine is called BEST, and it is intended to achieve the first plasma in 2027. BEST is designed to operate at higher plasma currents and for longer durations than East, with the specific purpose of generating the engineering data required for the stage that follows. The next stage is CFETR, the China Fusion Engineering Test Reactor. CFETR is China's planned full-scale fusion demonstrator, and it sits at the center of the country's long-term energy ambitions in this area. Construction is targeted to begin in the late 2020s. The reactor is projected to generate several hundred megawatts of fusion power through the 2030s, with projections pointing toward 1 gigawatt of continuous clean electricity output by the 2040s. China's published roadmap sets a commercial fusion power plant prototype as a target for around 2050, with broader deployment of fusion energy technology intended to follow in the decades after that. The roadmap is not a wish list. It is a sequenced plan with specific machines, specific timelines, and a research budget that has been sustained through multiple government funding cycles. The scientists working on East are not operating independently of that plan. They are producing results that directly inform the engineering decisions being made for BEST and CFETR. The plasma behavior data gathered during the January 2025 record run and the density results announced in 2026 are the kind of findings that get incorporated into the design specifications for the next machine in the sequence. Every record set at East is, in practical terms, a step taken on the path towards something considerably larger. To understand where China currently stands relative to the rest of the world in fusion research, it is worth looking at the main international alternative. ITER, which stands for International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, is a large-scale fusion project being built in southern France. It represents a collaboration between 35 countries, including the United States, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, Russia, and China. The concept behind ITER dates back to the 1980s, and the project has been under physical construction since 2013. Its purpose is to demonstrate that fusion can produce more energy than it consumes, which is the scientific milestone the field refers to as net energy gain. ITER has not had a straightforward development. The project has experienced repeated delays and significant cost increases over the course of its construction. Cost estimates have risen to over 20 billion euros by recent assessments, and the timeline has been revised multiple times. The current schedule does not target first plasma until 2035. Crucially, ITER is not designed to generate electricity. It is a scientific demonstration device, not a power plant, and even when it eventually operates, it will not be connected to any grid. The step from ITER's results to an actual electricity-generating fusion facility would require further development work and further investment by the participating nations. That comparison is worth sitting with for a moment. China is currently holding every major fusion performance record in the world. It is actively running experiments at EAST. It is best scheduled for 2027. It has CFETR in development for the late 2020s. The international project that represents the combined effort of 35 countries, including some of the wealthiest and most technologically advanced nations on Earth, is still more than a decade away from its first plasma milestone and is not designed to produce electricity at all. The gap in pace between China's national program and the international collaborative effort is significant by any reasonable measure. There are reasons for that gap that go beyond simple investment levels. Large international scientific collaborations involve coordination challenges that national programs do not face in the same way. Decisions about design changes, budget allocations, and technical priorities have to be negotiated between member states with different interests and different domestic political contexts. ITER has also been working at a scale and ambition level that has genuinely no precedent, which has contributed to some of the delays. None of that makes the timeline comparison less meaningful, but it does provide some context for why a focused national program operating within a single institutional structure can move at a different pace. The question of what fusion energy would mean for the global energy system, if and when it becomes commercially viable, is one that reaches well beyond the scientific and engineering domain. The primary fuel for fusion, deuterium, is derived from seawater. It is available in effectively unlimited quantities and is distributed across every ocean on the planet. No country owns it. No organization controls access to it. No supply chain can be disrupted by political decisions or geographical constraints. That is a fundamentally different situation from every other significant energy source currently in use. The global energy system as it currently exists is shaped in large part by the uneven distribution of fossil fuel reserves. Countries that sit above large oil or gas deposits have a form of leverage over those that do not. Supply routes, pipeline networks, and shipping lanes carry geopolitical weight precisely because the energy flowing through them is not replaceable at short notice. Wars have been fought, alliances have been formed, and foreign policies have been constructed around access to fossil fuel resources. A world in which the primary fuel source is derived from seawater, and in which the main barrier to energy access is the ability to build and operate the relevant technology rather than the possession of a particular natural resource, would be organized quite differently. The country that develops commercially viable fusion technology first would therefore be in a position that goes beyond ordinary industrial or economic advantage. It would control the intellectual property associated with the reactor designs, the superconducting magnet systems, the plasma heating architecture, and the control software. It would have the manufacturing experience and supply chains needed to build these machines at scale. Other countries seeking access to fusion power would need to engage with the nation that holds that knowledge on terms set by that nation. That dynamic has historically applied to the countries controlling fossil fuel reserves. Fusion would not eliminate energy geopolitics, but it would substantially redraw the map. China's fusion program has also had an international dimension that adds a layer of complexity to this picture. Since EAST began operations in 2006, it has functioned as an open research platform. Scientists from more than 100 institutions around the world have worked at the facility, and the plasma physics findings have been published and shared with the wider research community. That openness has been genuine and has contributed to the global knowledge base in fusion science. At the same time, the engineering knowledge developed through EAST's operation sits in a different category from the published physics results. The specific design choices made in EAST's superconducting magnet systems, the plasma control software developed through nearly 2 decades of operational experience, the heating system architecture that enabled the January 2025 record run, those are not simply published in academic journals. They are the product of an institutional learning process that accumulates inside the organizations that built and operate the machine. That knowledge transfers directly into the design of BEST and CFETR. The open science produced at EAST has been a contribution to global research. The engineering capability built through operating EAST is something China has developed for itself. Sun Tao, the director of the Institute of Plasma Physics, has stated publicly that a fusion device needs to achieve stable operation at high efficiency for thousands of seconds to enable the continuous plasma circulation required for practical power generation. Thousands of seconds is the target. EAST crossed 1,000 seconds in January 2025. The distance between that milestone and the sustained continuous operation required for a commercial power plant is real, and it should not be understated. But for the first time, that distance is measurable in a way it was not before, and the team closing it has demonstrated a consistent ability to make large jumps rather than small ones. The arc of EAST's development over the past 2 decades tells a clear story. In 2006, the machine held plasma for fractions of a second. In 2021, it crossed 100 seconds. In 2023, it reached 403 seconds. In 2025, it passed 1,000 seconds. In 2026, it broke a plasma density barrier that the field had considered a hard constraint. Each of those steps was not a minor refinement. Each one required identifying what was limiting the previous result and engineering a solution capable of pushing past it. The team has done that repeatedly on an accelerating curve with a larger and more capable machine already scheduled to follow. Whether that trajectory continues at the same rate is something that only time and further experimentation will confirm. Fusion research has a long history of results that looked transformative and then proved more complicated than they initially appeared. The scientific community will continue to scrutinize every announcement coming out of Hefei, and that scrutiny is appropriate. But the record set in January 2025 was verified. The density result announced in 2026 was taken seriously by researchers across the field, and the roadmap China has laid out is funded and staffed in a way that gives it credibility as an operational plan rather than an aspiration. The energy source that fusion promises, clean, essentially limitless, derived from a fuel available to every nation on Earth, has been a goal of scientific research for 70 years. The question of who gets there first, and on whose terms the rest of the world then gains access to that technology, is no longer purely a scientific question. It is a question that the results coming out of Hefei are beginning to answer in a concrete and measurable way.